Hello, everyone, and welcome to my channel. Uh, it's an educational channel, and we generally take a look at great theories of everything, uh, all-encompassing theories, grand unified theories, cosmologies, things that encompass every aspect of life, and usually obscure, put together by people who spent their whole life working on something, or at least decades working on something, but not really getting any credit or acknowledgement over the years, and are in jeopardy to be falling out of the historical record. This is our 94th video that we've done on the book called Mastering the Core Teachings of the Buddha by Dr. Daniel Ingram. And this book is about all aspects of Buddhism, but particularly the core teachings. So I'm not sharing it as a religion per se, but really as a set of techniques, a science, instructions, and maps to help you if you are a meditator. In the Buddhist system, they classified meditation into two kinds, both concentration meditation, concentration on an object, and insight meditation, meditation on opening up your five senses and your mental impressions and observing them, investigating them for the three characteristics of impermanence, dissatisfactoriness, and no self. And by doing that, we cycle around the stages of insight. In the concentration realm, we cycle around states of, or we move from one state to another. Mainly like trance states. And Ingram provides maps from the Buddhist tradition that describe these various states, so you kind of know the territory or know what to expect, know what happened to you, and it's presented comprehensively and on a silver platter for us, as it is in modern English. So we are toward the end here, and we're in an autobiographical section, but he has kind of dropped out a little bit here to talk about the psychic powers, magic, and whether it's worth it, how to handle it skillfully, and what are the dangers and how you can protect yourself. So let's start up right here where we left off last time. That sort of initial skepticism overlaying a somewhat contradictory and yet nuanced belief system regarding the powers is normal, it turns out. The reality is that when people experience something that defies their specific list of what they consider normal magical stuff and what they consider crazy magical stuff, then people can get freaked out and sometimes come up with all sorts of harmful and unskillful responses to what just happened. Even before they start having interesting experiences that they didn't expect they could have, just being exposed to people talking about these things can turn people off. Hence the problem with mentioning the powers at all in a book that has insight maps that should be taught in high school as part of a standard curriculum on human health and biology. Hopefully someone will write that textbook, as this book isn't going to be it, or at least not in Texas. I don't think I get that, but maybe I will. Since I have mentioned angels, demons, devils, and fairies, I should discuss how magical experiences of other beings can raise the obvious question about what beings might exist in the magical world and how we relate to them. Buddhism is filled with a vast array of magical beings who reflect the underlying mythology of the area at the time, as well as the cosmology of the various worlds and the 31 planes of existence. In fact, were one to read the texts without any preconceptions about Buddhism, one could easily conclude that Buddhism was mostly about animism, shamanism, morality, and magic, with a bit of insight thrown onto the top like a cherry. In addition to humans, this list of various spirit beings typically includes various high gods, lower gods, spirits of various places that show a heavy animist flavor. Hungry ghosts, hell beings, not to mention demons, giant snake spirits called nagas, as well as giant flying beings called garudas. And in various tantric beings, suddenly the list gets a lot longer. One of the defining aspects of magic in Buddhism is that mastery of the powers is judged primarily by the skillful use and understanding of them, not the raw power itself. While Buddhism has techniques that can produce stunningly powerful magic, the texts are constantly emphasizing that it be used only for some good purpose, directed to kindness or wisdom, and not become a source of attachment, arrogance, or harm. It is not that every spontaneous magical experience will necessarily clearly be a source of wisdom or compassion, but every directed one should aspire to be. This difference becomes particularly striking when we examine aspects such as the relationship to various magical beings. Some non-Buddhist magical traditions might emphasize techniques to summon, bind, and control magical beings, while others might enter some sort of bargaining or bartering relationship to beings. Others might worship powerful beings whose favor or boons they covet and humbly request. In Buddhism, however, particularly if we read the old texts, we notice again and again that the emphasis is a more skillful relationship to beings. The Buddha set the example by being kind to beings, teaching them the Dharma, radiating loving kindness to them, and relating to them in ways that were fearless and wise. The Buddha was routinely depicted as giving teachings to gods who had great reverence for him and listened with rapt attention. Magical beings become yet another class of beings to try to bring into the wisdom of the Dharma. Curiously, there are far more examples of the Buddha skillfully interacting with magical beings in the old texts, and there are careful instructions on meditation practice. A world full of magical beings and many vast realms that interpenetrate this universe could be relatively frightening, as we humans are not necessarily at the top of that magical being heap, and we are used to being at the top of the heap in this material plane. Instructions in Buddhist texts typically promise that various practices will cause us to have a positive relationship to these beings, which obviously makes Buddhist practice very appealing. It is also explicitly stated in numerous sutras that powerful meditation practice and morality were sufficient protection against attacks by demons, mischievous devas, and spirits in general. Various other practices were described for pacifying hostile spirits, befriending the spirits of a place, and protecting skillful practitioners from harmful entities. Interestingly, once you start to live with a set of experiences that reflects a vastly expanded magical biosphere and cosmos, you can test out which of these Buddhist practices perform as advertised. As these practices are explicitly magically effective for specific purposes, we have come to the place to list the various powers described in the old texts. And so this next chapter, chapter 63, is called Definitions of the Powers. Speaking of textbooks, and now that I have gotten both the standard and non-standard warnings and disclaimers out of the way, we might as well get down to defining what we are talking about regarding the powers. We can start with the standard lists in some of the earliest extant texts of the Pali Canon, such as that found in Sutra DN2, or Fruits of the Contemplative Life. They include bilocation and polylocation, appearing and disappearing, walking through objects, flying, delving into the earth, walking on water, touching the sun and moon, traveling to other realms, producing various objects, hearing sounds both near and far, seeing things both near and far, knowing the mind states and mental qualities of others, recalling past lives, seeing beings pass away and being reborn according to their karma, the clear perception that cuts off delusion and brings wisdom. It is an oddly short list, given the wide range of what people may experience and cultivate, and given the vast range of powers described in the early canonical material. The Visuddhimagga adds, sitting on empty space, manipulating weather and causing earthquakes, causing smoke, fires, and sparks, creating lights to see by, burning up the body at the death of an arahant, causing darkness, altering our appearance, turning objects into gold, creating objects in various specific colors, dispelling darkness, banishing stiffness and torpor, revealing hidden things. This is also a pretty short list. I will add to these the following very abbreviated list of some of the more common things that people can get into. Knowing things about other people, such as their past, motivations, and thoughts. Knowing things about the future. Having various helpful intuitions. Seeing, feeling, and manipulating energy, chakras, energy channels, and auras in ourselves and others. Healing various things in ourselves and others. Sending and receiving messages in various ways. Influencing the course of various events. Those of you with strong concentration and more experiences with the cities will be laughing at how short this list is. Interestingly, these lists don't even cover all the powers that the Buddha and some of his followers exhibit in the old texts. And if you read the stories of the Buddha and his followers and wrote down all the magical actions they perform, the list would be much longer. Then there is the dark side to the powers, which brings us to the question of ethics. And so this chapter 64 is called Ethics and the Powers. Once we have dealt with our initial reactions to the powers and have gotten more into them, we run into the perennial question related to their ethical use. It is an endless topic of TV shows, movies, legends, novels, and the like. Much advice is available ranging from stay the heck away from them to cultivate them consciously so as to use them for good. These are very old themes, and we see them in texts over 2,000 years old exactly the way we see them today. Spiritual traditions across the board have a very clear love-hate relationship with the powers, and if you begin to experiment with them, you will come to understand why. The stories of the Buddha demonstrate clearly that he and those around him found them extremely fascinating, occasionally useful, and often profound. In fact, there are many canonical stories of the Buddha using his powers starting just after his enlightenment and continuing right up to the end. The Buddha singled out praiseworthy individuals in the sutras, and he gave the most praise to arhants, who could attain the formless realms and powers. On the flip side, the Buddha also clearly stated that the powers are dangerous, a distraction, and abhorrent. Just as with any powerful energy, such as sexual energy, the powers tend to reveal our true colors, as it were. The various Buddhist schools also have widely varying attitudes toward the powers. Zen basically says they are all illusion and should be ignored, this being the sum of their public advice on the subject. As a Tibetan nun pointed out to me, in the Mahayana and Vajrayana systems that developed in India and were brought to and maintained throughout Tibet, the powers were intended to be of benefit to others within the context of strict ethical disciplines that included the vowed morality of the fundamental vehicle, Hinayana, which literally translates as small vehicle, the universal vehicle, or Mahayana, literally the great vehicle, and or Vajrayana, the diamond vehicle. Unfortunately, powers in the hands of those with questionable ethics, insufficient training and mastery, and wrong intention, regardless of the vehicle they follow, will clearly degenerate into something they were not originally intended for. You can read about abuses in many places and across the centuries. The Theravadins fall somewhere in between, the totally ignore the cities attitude of Zen, and the cultivate the cities intentionally, but with extremely careful observance of vows and strong morality as part of the practice of the Tibetans. There are, however, differences in emphases between the sub-schools of all the major branches of Buddhism. Some powers are relatively ethically benign. Experiencing sensations such as simple colors and sounds, unrelated to form, messages, and beings, pose few ethical dilemmas most of the time. Things you do to yourself, such as energetic manipulation to relieve back tension or resolve a headache, generally not a problem. Using the powers at an archetypal level to gain insight into yourself and your past and the like, usually okay and maybe quite helpful. All these might be termed private powers, in that they are basically about you and your own internal experience. Most of the time, the private powers are just fine. Where it gets more delicate is when we start to get into anything that has to do with anyone else. At this point, I realize I'm going to lose some of you, and that's okay. But I ask you to keep reading with an open mind and store this next part away somewhere in case you should ever need it. You never know that what might seem crazy today just might make sense tomorrow. Powers that we use to manipulate others, the world around us, or to gain knowledge that we otherwise would not have access to is where the ethics start to get dicey. These are powers that explicitly involve other people in a much more direct way. There are plenty of abilities that it seems we can learn on this front. I would generally urge caution about formally and consciously tapping into the sort of power that involves manipulating anything beyond your own body or mind. It is vital to remember that you will reap what you sow. That is, effects resemble causes when considering the formal use of such power. Kind intention is essential, but even this is often not enough to keep us from screwing up when we give in to temptation to formally manipulate the world in unusual ways. Power corrupts, as the adage goes. I personally am very much influenced by the fictional character of Ogion, O-G-I-O-N, the Silent, from Ursula Le Guin's classic novel A Wizard of Earthsea. whose deep respect for the complexities involved in magic makes him extremely cautious with his otherwise phenomenal power. I strongly recommend you read this book since it serves not only as a brilliant allegory to the issues that surround the powers and how much you can screw up with them, but also the arc of the story also reads almost exactly like an insight map. Tangentially, I think that the Western world needs more fantasy stories and legends that incorporate real elements of map and practice theory like those presented here. If you have writing talent and an experiential understanding of the fruits of the Dharma, please consider writing these stories. Just as with anything else you would do to or with someone, consent is extremely important. Even then, there is something about the intimacy of magical manipulation that can yield results we didn't know could enter the mix. It is simply impossible to understand or perceive the full implications of any act, and this applies many times over for the powers, as they are weird, and this is a weirdness that is very hard to understand even in simple terms. Reality and causality are extremely complex and, for the most part, inscrutable. It is very easy to deceive ourselves regarding the purity and integrity of our intentions. What is deep down in the level of our hearts, guts, and groins is what matters in magic, as that is where emotional energy resides. The powers often come from those deep emotional centers. Those are also deep levels of ourselves that we typically aren't honestly connected to. Thus, even if we believe we told someone what we were going to do and they agreed to it, there's going to be other stuff from more primal, less conscious parts of ourselves that will very likely enter the exchange. If they are okay with that as sophisticated and consenting adults, fine, but most adults are not sophisticated when it comes to the powers. Secondly, that part about exchange is important. One of the essential insights that makes the powers work is the appreciation of the interdependent and interconnected nature of the universe. Though we don't have to appreciate those for the powers to occur, still, the greater our appreciation of interconnection, the more the powers can flow. The essential and hopefully obvious point about interconnection is that just as the object of any spell we cast is connected to us, and so is a part of the web of causality, just so are we connected to them. Think of it as a two-way channel, though actually this interwoven reality is even more direct and interdependent than that. Anyone and anything we manipulate magically reinforces that connection and communication. We are also exposing ourselves to their energetic aspects, the emotional, the primal, and magical ones, just as they are being exposed to ours. That contact is going to have effects on both sides, so I highly recommend careful consideration of what those effects might be before doing anything formal. Not that you are likely to be able to know the full scope of those effects and what awaits you and them. Consider the basic physiological model of the brain, in which the world we experience is happening inside a brain somewhere. Neurons that fire together wire together. Pathways that are reinforced grow stronger. Let's say that Betty starts doing a bunch of magical workings related to Bob. Those neuronal connections between the parts of Betty's brain that map to the experience of Bob are going to be reinforced by that strongly emotional, strongly concentrated attention. Do you really want more of your brain wired more strongly to aspects of Bob? If not, don't go there. Then there is the spontaneous magic, the magic we didn't consciously intend, know would happen or had no way of knowing could happen, and just occurred seemingly out of nowhere. The universe is lawful and causal, but it can appear very mysterious and opaque. Seemingly spontaneous and unintended magic is still ethically complex, as effects will occur, but more important is what happens next time. If a power has occurred once, then you know what it is and can be more conscious about it, such as to resolve to have it happen only when you wish it to. Such resolutions don't always work perfectly, nor are they always reproducible or verifiable. But when heartfelt and well-intended, they generally do pretty well. Note my editor cautioned that I may have a naively trusting blind spot here, and perhaps I do. Still, the point remains. As an example, let's say that through the inclination or just random luck, meaning causality too complex to comprehend, you begin to read or sense the thoughts and emotions of others. Do you want to tell them this or even act on these intuitive feelings on the assumption that they are correct? You might get the sense that you can manipulate others' emotions or energetic states in ways that would be considered magical. Is this a good idea? There are no easy answers to some of the ethical and practical questions that can arise from the cities, but I would advise extreme caution and restraint. Respect others' rights and remember that actions done for other than compassionate purposes are likely to cause an ugly backlash. In fact, and this is crucial to understand, even actions done with compassionate intentions can have an ugly backlash, particularly if you cannot truly discern another's situation or developmental stage. So again, care and restraint are often best. You are hopefully selective and prudent in relation to how you would touch others' physical bodies, so take the same care with their minds and energetic systems. If you are going to be doing these sorts of practices on other people, getting permission beforehand is not only polite, but also critical, as the entities and situations that you interact with and reach out to also affect you. When you enter someone's home turf, they are quite likely to have the home court advantage. When you suddenly feel you can manipulate things like the moods and energetic systems of those around you, you may find the temptation hard to resist. When you suddenly seem to know information about people that you wouldn't normally have known, you could easily give in to the temptation to show off or exploit that knowledge. Even if you are generally blessed with a well-developed, integrated, and relatively automatic morality for ordinary ethical issues, it can just be so cool to have unexpected additional capabilities, and this can very easily and quickly cause you to go astray in both the short and the long term. It is so easy to imagine that whatever we are doing is in another's best interest and not realize the completely selfish and blind aspects of our extremely limited understanding and assessment of the situation. Further, situations that initially appear bad can lead to surprisingly good results, and vice versa. Then, as mentioned earlier, there is the question of blatantly dark magic. It is magic based on greed, hatred, and delusion, or more specifically, lust, anger, fear, arrogance, cruelty, the desire for vengeance, and the like. The issue with the powers is that once the gate is opened, once we know where the juice is, how to use it, etc., letting the powers slip or rush out can get easy, and then temptation sets in. Even if the powers don't come easily and require large setups and building up concentration with days of practice and so on, magic based on dark and unsavory feelings can be very compelling, and with those energies can sneak out of an even slightly cracked gate with force and speed. We might rationalize our lapse of judgment and imagine that something good will come of it. Some personal gain, or even some wrong righted, some justice done, or perhaps something good will be in the mix of results. But harm leads to harm, darkness to darkness, and evil to evil. The potential is great for the runaway train of extremely damaging self-deceptions, motives, and actions. Putting a self-rationalizing spin on it cements that self-deception. It's nearly impossible to backpedal from such scenarios, and crawling out of the resulting abyss may cost lifetimes. Strong magic comes out of deeply personal feelings and strong intent. Whatever magical acts we do, we write those imprints within ourselves. If they are dark, we strongly write that darkness into our internal wiring. Do good in this world, white light, compassion, kindness, gentleness, forgiveness, empathy, healing, respect, patience, and peace on the fabric of your mind, and this interdependent world. That is my very best advice. Avoid learning the hard way. It can be tragic and destructive for a long time, and in many ways for all involved, and even for those not directly involved. I am quite aware of the relatively sophisticated arguments that would say that all magic is gray magic rather than strictly black or white, in that it may benefit some, harm others, and create all sorts of unintended effects whose merits and downsides may not be apparent, as with all actions in this world. It is a reasonable argument, yet while acknowledging the gray magic argument as true in some ways, there is still much to be said for staying far to the light and moral end of the path whenever possible, realizing that the best intentions can cause trouble. All right, that's the end of the chapter. Thanks for tuning in today. We'll start up with chapter 65 tomorrow, how to cultivate the powers. And thanks for tuning in today. Have a wonderful